The night was cold, the kind of cold that slipped into the bones and stayed there. The city was quiet, except for the distant hum of broken streetlights and the soft rustle of trash drifting in the wind. Ethan walked home from his late shift, his hands buried deep in his jacket pockets. His boots splashed through shallow puddles left by the earlier rain. He was almost at his building when he heard it. Sound so small that most people would have missed it. It wasn't the squeak of rats or the drip of leaking pipes. It was softer, shakier, almost like someone trying not to cry. Ethan slowed down, his eyes scanning the narrow alley between two old brick buildings. At first he saw nothing, just shadows, piles of damp cardboard, and the flicker of a dying street lamp. But then, in the farthest corner, he saw movement. Something shifted under the dim light. He stepped closer, and that was when he saw her. She was small, maybe no. Older than 12 by human standards, though her features were not human at all. Her skin had a faint blue tint, her eyes were wide and glowing faintly in the dark, and her hair was tangled and damp. She sat on the cold ground with her knees pulled up to her chest, her thin arms wrapped around them as if trying to keep herself from falling apart. Her clothes were torn and far too big for her. They hung loosely on her frame, showing how thin she was. Ethan could see the sharp outline of her shoulders and collarbone. In her lap was an empty food wrapper, crushed tightly in her small hands. She looked up at him, startled, like a frightened animal caught in a trap. For a moment, neither of them moved. Ethan felt something in his chest tighten. He had seen this before. Not here, not like this, but in himself. He knew what it meant to be hungry, to be alone, to have no one look at you as if you mattered. "Hey," he said softly, his voice careful. "It's all right." The girl's eyes narrowed. She didn't speak. Instead, she shifted slightly, her body tensing as if ready to bolt. But Ethan could tell she didn't have the strength to run far. She was too weak, too tired. He glanced at the empty wrapper in her hands. "Hungry?" he asked. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the bread roll he had saved from work. Slowly, he crouched down and placed it on the ground, a few steps away from her. She didn't move at first. Her gaze flicked from him to the bread, then back again. The wind blew through the alley, carrying the faint smell of fresh bread to her. Her throat moved as she swallowed. "It's for you," Ethan said, keeping his tone gentle. He didn't reach for her, didn't step closer. Instead, he slowly backed away a little, giving her space. Her glowing eyes stayed locked on him for a moment longer. Then, with quick, sharp movements, she crawled forward and snatched the bread. She tore into it with a speed that made Ethan's stomach twist. She ate like someone who hadn't had a real meal in days, maybe longer. When she finished, she held the last small piece in her hands for a moment before eating it more slowly. Almost as if trying to make it last, Ethan stood there, unsure what to do next. He didn't want to scare her away, but leaving her here felt wrong. She looked so fragile, so breakable, and yet there was something in her eyes, a flicker of defiance, of survival, that told him she had fought hard to make it this far. The girl wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. But she didn't run either. That was something. "What's your name?" Ethan asked, trying again. She tilted her head slightly as if the question was strange to her. After a long pause, she said something in a language he didn't understand. The sound was soft, almost musical, but it was followed by a quiet cough. And Ethan saw how her small body shivered in the cold. The rain started again, just a light drizzle at first. She pulled her arms tighter around herself, her damp hair sticking to her face. Ethan hesitated, then shrugged off his jacket. He walked forward slowly. She tensed again, eyes sharp and wary, but she didn't move away when he held the jacket out to her. "You'll freeze out here," he said. She stared at it for a moment, then at him. Finally, she reached out with thin fingers and took it. The sleeves were far too long for her, but she pulled it around herself tightly. The faintest hint of relief crossed her face. Ethan knew he should go home. He knew he could pretend this wasn't his problem. But he also knew he wouldn't sleep tonight if he left her here. "You can come with me," he said, his voice steady. "Just for tonight. Warm place, food, no one will hurt you." She didn't answer. She just sat there, staring at him through the drizzle. Then, slowly, she stood. She kept her distance, following him out of the alley like a stray animal, still deciding if it could trust him. And as they walked, Ethan felt the strange weight of the moment settle in his chest. He didn't know who she was, where she had come from, or what had happened to her. But he knew one thing for sure. This wasn't the last time their paths would cross. Somewhere deep down, he could already feel it. The old stairwell creaked under Ethan's boots as he led the small alien girl up to his apartment. She followed several steps behind, her eyes darting to every corner as if expecting danger to leap from the shadows. Her thin frame made almost no sound. The way she gripped his jacket around herself told him she still felt the cold biting at her bones. When they reached his door, Ethan unlocked it and stepped aside. "Go ahead," he said gently. She didn't move. She stood there, staring at the doorway like it was a trap. Ethan understood doors could mean safety, but they could also mean no way out. He took a step back, showing his empty hands. "You can leave any time you want," he said. "No one will stop you." She studied his face for a long moment before stepping inside. Her bare feet made soft sounds on the worn wooden floor. The apartment was small, just a living room, a kitchen in the corner, and a narrow hallway leading to one bedroom, but compared to the cold alley, it was another world. The girl stood still, her eyes scanning every object. Her gaze lingered on the small table, the battered sofa, and the steaming mug of tea on the counter. Ethan could almost hear her thoughts measuring if this place was safe, or if it was just another place she'd have to run from. He went to the kitchen and opened the cupboard. "Are you hungry?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. He placed a loaf of bread, a jar of peanut butter, and a can of soup on the counter. She didn't move closer, but her eyes followed every action. Ethan took a slice of bread, spread peanut butter on it, and set it on a plate. He placed it on the coffee table in the living room, then stepped away. For a moment, she didn't move. Then, almost silently, she padded forward and picked up the bread. She took a small bite, then another, faster this time. When the slice was gone, she glanced at him, as if to see if there would be punishment for eating more. Ethan gave her a small nod and held out a second slice. She hesitated before taking it, but this time there was no rush. She chewed slowly, watching him the whole time. "What happened to you?" he asked quietly. Her eyes shifted away. She mumbled something in her own language, the soft syllables. Almost like music, but he could catch a few words. "Bad people," she said in broken English. Then she tapped her wrist, as if showing him something. Ethan's gaze dropped, faint marks wrapped around her wrists. Old but clear. Restraints. He felt a sharp anger in his chest. Someone had hurt her, kept her locked away like she was nothing. "You're safe now," he said. The girl didn't answer. Oh. She just finished her bread and set the plate down. The sound of rain against the windows filled the silence, Ethan realized. She was still standing, even though the couch was right behind her. "You can sit," he said, gesturing. Slowly, she lowered herself onto the edge of the couch. Her small hands clutched his oversized jacket tighter around her. Her glowing eyes kept shifting to the door as if making sure it was still open. Ethan wanted to ask her more. Where she came from, how she got here, why she was alone. But he could see the exhaustion in her face. Her eyelids drooped, her shoulders sagged, yet there was still tension in every line of her body. Like she was ready to run at the first wrong move. He brought out a folded blanket and held it out. She looked at it for a moment before slowly taking it from him. "Sleep," he said. "You can rest here." Her gaze lingered on him, cautious, but less sharp than before. Lay down on the couch, pulling the blanket over herself. Even then, she didn't close her eyes right away. She watched him as if trying to read something in his face, whether he meant the words he spoke. Ethan moved to the kitchen and busied himself with making tea, giving her space. By the time he returned, her eyes were still half open, but her breathing had slowed. He sat in the armchair across from her, sipping his tea in the quiet. He told himself this was temporary. He would make sure she got to a shelter or somewhere safer in the morning. But deep down, a part of him already knew he wasn't going to let her go so easily. The rain outside grew heavier, drumming against the glass. The girl shifted in her sleep, a faint sound escaping her lips, a word in her language. Didn't understand it, but something about the tone made him think of home, family, of belonging. And that was when Ethan realized the first step wasn't her walking through his door. The first step had been his choice in that alley, when he decided to stop instead of walking past. What he didn't know yet was that this small act would pull him into something far bigger than he had ever faced, and that this fragile, scared, little alien was about to change his life in ways he couldn't imagine. The storm came fast, as if the sky had been holding back all day and finally let go. Heavy rain pounded the city, rattling the windows of Ethan's small apartment. The wind whistled through the narrow streets outside, carrying the smell of wet concrete and distant smoke. Ethan stood at the window, staring at the blur of streetlights in the downpour. Behind him, the little alien girl sat curled up on the couch, his oversized jacket and a blanket wrapped tightly around her. Her glowing eyes followed the sound of the rain, wide and alert, as if every noise could mean danger. "You're lucky you're not out there," Ethan said, his voice calm. He didn't expect her to answer, but she tilted her head toward him. The truth was, Ethan wasn't sure who was luckier, her for finding shelter, or him for finding her. Something about her presence filled the quiet of the apartment in a way he hadn't realized he needed. A loud crack of thunder shook the walls, and she flinched. Her small hands tightened on the blanket. She glanced toward the door, then toward the dark corners of the room. It's like she was remembering somewhere else, another storm. One far more dangerous. Ethan stepped away from the window and sat down in the armchair across from her. "No one's going to get you here," he said. He meant it, but he could see the disbelief in her eyes. She spoke a few words in her own language. Soft, almost too quiet to hear, then tried to form a sentence in broken English. "Bad people come when rain," she said, her voice trembling. Ethan's jaw tightened. Whoever had heard her, they had left scars deeper than the marks on her wrists. "Won't come here," he said firmly. Her gaze stayed on him for a moment, searching his face for something, maybe a lie, maybe a promise. Then she looked away, curling tighter into the blanket. The apartment lights flickered as the storm grew worse. Somewhere outside, a car alarm went off, wailing into the night. The girl's ears twitched at the sound. Her people, Ethan guessed, probably had sharper hearing than humans. "Hungry?" he asked, trying to distract her. "Yeah." She hesitated, then gave the smallest nod. Ethan went to the kitchen and heated a can of soup. The smell of vegetables and broth soon filled the room, warm and comforting against the cold air pressing at the windows. He poured the soup into a bowl and set it gently on the coffee table in front of her. She didn't grab it like she had in the alley. Instead, she stared at it for a long moment, her eyes flicking from the steam to his face, as if she still couldn't believe it was for her. "It's yours," he said, leaning back to give her space. Slowly, she reached out and took the spoon. Her first sip was small, cautious, but then she took another and another. Soon, her shoulders relaxed a little. Ethan watched her eat. But because there was something about the way she handled each bite, careful, almost grateful, that made him realize how little she'd had in her life. When the bowl was empty, she set it down and murmured something under her breath. Ethan didn't understand the words, but the tone was softer now, warmer. The lights flickered again, and this time the power went out completely. The apartment sank into darkness, broken only by the dim glow from her eyes. Outside, the storm raged harder, wind howling like a living thing. Ethan moved quickly, finding a flashlight in the drawer. He set it on the table, the beam casting long shadows on the walls. The girl's gaze followed the light, her body tense again. "Power will come back," he told her. "Just a blackout." She didn't seem convinced. The sound of the wind made her flinch again. Ethan thought for a moment, then pulled another blanket from the closet. He sat on the couch next to her, draping the blanket over both of them. For a moment she froze. But then, slowly, she shifted closer, as if drawn to the warmth. Her head tilted slightly toward him, not quite resting, but close enough that he could feel her trust beginning to take root. The rain hammered against the windows. Somewhere deep in the city, sirens wailed, but here in the small apartment, there was only the steady sound of breathing and the faint rustle of the blankets. Ethan didn't speak. He didn't need to. The girl seemed calmer now, her glowing eyes blinking slower. Every once in a while, she glanced at the door, but her shoulders were less tense. The storm outside could rage all night. But here, inside these walls, she was safe. And Ethan found himself silently making a promise, not just for tonight, but for as long as it took. He didn't know why he felt so strongly about protecting her. Maybe it was because he had been alone once, and someone had given him a second chance. Or maybe it was because he could see something in her, a strength hidden under all that fear. Either way, as the night dragged on and the storm roared, he knew this was no longer just a moment of kindness. This was the beginning of something much bigger. Morning came slowly, with the weak light of the sun slipping through the thin curtains. The rain had stopped during the night, leaving the streets outside quiet and washed clean. Ethan woke to the faint sound of movement from the living room. When he stepped out of his bedroom, he saw her, the small alien girl, crouched by the window, peeking through the curtain. She was still wrapped in his oversized jacket, but now her hood was pulled low over her face. "You're up early?" Ethan said gently. She turned quickly, her glowing eyes wide for a moment before she recognized him. Though she relaxed, only slightly. She pointed outside toward the street. "People," she said in her soft, broken English. Ethan walked over and looked. A man was walking a dog. An old woman was sweeping her front step. Just normal city life. "They're not here for you," he said. "They're just neighbors." The girl didn't seem convinced. She stepped back from the window, retreating to the couch. Her hands tugged at the cuffs of the jacket sleeves, pulling them over her wrists like she was hiding something. Ethan noticed. "Let me see," he said quietly. She froze, then shook her head. "It's okay," he said, moving to sit in the chair across from her. "No one will hurt you." After a moment, she slowly pushed the fabric back. The marks on her wrists were clearer in the daylight, deep lines, old scars that had healed unevenly. Ethan's chest tightened. These weren't accidents. They were the kind of marks left by restraints worn too long. "Who did this to you?" he asked, his voice low. She looked away, staring at the floor. In her own language, she said a short sentence, the tone sharp and bitter. Ethan couldn't understand the words, but the feeling in them was clear anger and pain. Tangled together, she tried again in broken English. "Bad place," she said. Caged, she hesitated, then added, "Work. No food." Ethan's jaw clenched. Whoever had taken her had treated her like property, like something to use and discard. He wanted to ask more, but he could see her shoulders stiffen at the memories. Pushing now would only make her shut down. Instead, he got up and went to the kitchen. "You want breakfast?" he asked. She didn't answer right away. Then, slowly, she nodded. Ethan made scrambled eggs and toast, the smell filling the small apartment. He set the plate in front of her.
Nice.
She picked up the toast first, taking small bites, chewing slowly like she wanted to make it last as she ate. Ethan noticed something else. She kept glancing at the door every few seconds. Not in fear this time, but as if she was making sure she still had an escape. "You don't have to run anymore," Ethan said. "You're safe here." She looked at him for a long moment, and in a voice so quiet he almost missed it, she said, "Safe." For now, the words chilled him more than he expected. It wasn't just fear, it was certainty, she believed. The people who had hurt her would come looking. She didn't think they would stop. After breakfast, Ethan sat back down in the armchair while she remained on the couch. The rain had left the air cool, and the window was still fogged at the edges. He tried again, gently. "What's your name?" She hesitated. Then she spoke a single word, soft and careful. "Ah." Ethan repeated it back, clumsy with the strange syllables. She gave the smallest smile, the first he had seen, and nodded. "That's a good name," he said. "I'm Ethan." She repeated his name, her voice uneven but clear enough. Then she said another word in her own language and pointed at him. He guessed it meant something like friend. For the rest of the morning, she stayed quiet, curling up in the corner of the couch. But every now and then, Ethan caught her watching him, her gaze steady and unreadable. He could feel that trust was starting to form, but it was fragile, like thin glass. One wrong move, and it could shatter. By the afternoon, the sky had turned gray again. A light drizzle tapped against the window. Ethan noticed her glance toward the door more often now, her body tensing at each sound from the street. "You're thinking about leaving?" he said softly. She didn't answer, but her silence was. "Enough. You can go if you want," he continued. "But I'd rather you stay. You need rest, food, safety." Eyes met his, and for a moment, something passed between them, an understanding that words couldn't quite cover. She was still deciding whether to believe him, whether this place could really be different from the ones before, and Ethan knew that whatever had happened to her out there, it was far from over. It was close to midnight when Ethan first noticed it, a shape outside the window, standing still under the yellow glow of the street lamp. At first he thought it was nothing, just a person passing through, maybe waiting for someone. But the figure didn't move. The rain had stopped hours ago, yet the shadow remained. Fixed like a dark mark on the street, Ethan stepped away from the curtain and glanced at the couch. The alien girl was curled up under the blanket, but her eyes were open. She wasn't sleeping. She was listening. "You see it too," he said quietly. Her glowing eyes flicked toward the window, then back to him. He nodded once, small and quick, before whispering, "They found me." Ethan's pulse quickened. "You're sure?" She pushed herself up, her small hands gripping the blanket like it could shield her. "I know them," she said, her voice low. "They watch before they take." The words sank heavy in the air. Ethan moved to the window again, keeping himself hidden in the shadows of the room. The figure outside had shifted slightly, turning toward the building, head tilted up as if scanning the windows. Ethan's mind raced. Whoever they weren't here for him. They were here for her. "All right," he said, forcing his voice calm. "We stay quiet. We wait." But she shook her head, her voice trembling. "If they know, they come." Ethan knew she was right. People like that, people who treated someone as property, didn't knock on doors. They forced them open. He moved quickly to the kitchen, grabbing the small flashlight and checking the locks on the door. "We'll be ready," he told her. She stood in the middle of the room, tense and alert. He could see the fight in her eyes now. Fear, yes, but also the same stubborn spark that had kept her alive this long. The minutes dragged. The figure outside still hadn't left. Ethan decided to test something. He flicked off the living room light. In the dimness, her faint glow became more visible. He saw her glance toward the bedroom door, the only other place to hide. Then it happened, a sharp, deliberate knock on the front door. The sound echoed in the small apartment. She froze, her breath catching in her throat. Ethan put a finger to his lips and motioned for her to stay still. Another knock, harder this time, then a voice muffled by the door but sharp enough to cut through the air. Ethan couldn't understand the words, but he didn't need to. He knew a demand when he heard one. She whispered something in her language, the tone urgent, and shook her head. "They know I am here." Ethan's mind went into overdrive. The building had two exits, the front door and the fire escape through the bedroom. If the people outside forced their way in, there'd be no time to think. He moved to the bedroom, motioning for her to follow. She hesitated for only a moment before slipping off the couch and running silently after him. The knocking grew louder, now joined by the sound of someone trying the handle. The metal rattled under the force. In the bedroom, Ethan unlatched the old fire escape window. The cold night air rushed in, carrying the faint smell of rain. Below, the alley stretched out in shadow, slick with water. "Go," he whispered. She climbed onto the sill with surprising speed, her bare feet silent on the metal. But before she stepped out, she turned to him, her glowing eyes locking with his. "You come too." He didn't argue, swung his legs through the window landing. On the metal platform beside her, together, they descended the fire escape, each step quick but careful. Above them, the sound of wood splintering tore through the air. The front door had given way. Shouts followed, harsh and fast, echoing in the small apartment they had just left. The girl gripped the railing with one hand and Ethan's sleeve with the other as they reached the bottom. He led her through the alley, moving fast, taking turns at random to throw off any pursuit. They didn't speak. The only sounds were their footsteps and the distant rumble of traffic. Ethan's heart pounded, but he kept his breathing steady, focusing on getting them as far as possible from the building. Finally, after several blocks, they ducked into a narrow gap between two warehouses. The space was dark, the smell of damp brick heavy in the air. Here, they could pause just for a moment. The girl pressed her back against the wall, her chest rising and falling quickly. "They not stop," she said, her voice a mix of fear and certainty. Ethan nodded. "Then we don't stop either." For a long moment, they stood there in the dark, the faint glow of her eyes, the only light between them. Somewhere far behind, he thought he heard a shout, carried faintly on the wind. It was a reminder this wasn't over. It's not even close. The night air was sharp against their skin as Ethan and the small alien girl slipped out from the narrow space between the warehouses. The streets ahead were mostly empty, lit by the occasional flicker of failing streetlights. Somewhere behind them, faint but growing louder, came the echo of hurried footsteps. "They follow," she whispered, her voice low but urgent. Ethan glanced over his shoulder. The street was still, but he trusted her instincts. If she said they were coming, they were coming. He took her hand, her small fingers gripping his tightly, and pulled her into motion. They moved quickly through the maze of side streets, taking turns at random to break any pattern. Ethan avoided the main roads, choosing narrow lanes where shadows swallowed them whole. The girl kept pace despite her small frame, her breath steady but quick. Every few blocks, Ethan paused to listen. At first, there was nothing but the distant hum of the city. Then faintly, the sound of boots on wet pavement. "Closer now. They not stop," she said again, her voice trembling but determined. "No, they won't," Ethan replied, his own tone firm. "But neither will we." They cut through a parking lot, weaving between rows of rusted cars. A security light above them flickered, casting their shadows long and thin across the ground. Ethan kept scanning the area, looking for a place to disappear. The girl tugged at his sleeve, pointing to a narrow alley between two tall buildings. It was barely wide enough for them to pass and littered with trash bags and broken crates. They slipped inside, the smell of damp and decay heavy in the air. Halfway through, Ethan stopped. At the far end, a figure blocked their path, tall, broad, standing perfectly still. The dim light caught a glint of metal in the stranger's hand. The girl's grip on him tightened. "One of them," she whispered. Ethan's mind raced. The alley behind them wasn't safe either. If they turned back, they'd run straight into whoever was chasing. He scanned the sides of the alley and spotted a fire escape ladder, its bottom rung just out of reach. "Climb," he said, crouching and offering his hands. She understood immediately, stepping onto his palm so he could lift her up. She grabbed the rung, pulled herself up, and extended the ladder down to him. The figure at the end of the alley moved forward, slow but deliberate. Ethan climbed fast, the metal cold under his hands. The girl was already halfway up when he reached the ladder's start, and together they scrambled onto the fire escape platform. From up high, the city stretched out in all directions, endless. Rooftops, steam rising from vents, the faint glow of neon signs in the distance. The wind cut across the open space, carrying the sound of shouts below. Ethan didn't wait to see how many there were. He led her across the fire escape and onto the roof of the building. The gravel crunched under their feet as they ran toward the far edge. A narrow gap separated this building from the next. He stopped at the edge, gauging the distance. The girl's eyes followed his gaze, then darted back to his face. "We jump?" she asked. "We jump," he said. Without hesitation, she backed up a step, then sprinted forward and leaped. Her small frame cleared the gap easily, landing in a crouch on the next roof. Ethan followed, his boots hitting the surface with a dull thud. They kept running, leaping from one building to another until the sound of their pursuers began to fade. When they finally stopped, they were several blocks away, hidden behind a row of large ventilation units. The girl dropped to a crouch, her chest rising and falling quickly. Her glowing eyes scanned the horizon, checking for movement. "Safe for now," she said. Ethan sank to one knee beside her. "Can't keep running forever. We need somewhere they won't think to look." She thought for a moment, then pointed toward the east side of the city. "Old place," she said. "No people." Ethan nodded. If it was empty, it might give them a chance to rest and plan. He stood and offered his hand. She took it without hesitation this time. They climbed down from the roof, using another fire escape, their footsteps careful on the metal. The streets in this part of the city were darker, the buildings older and more worn. As they walked, Ethan noticed a change in her. She still watched the shadows, still listened for every sound, but her steps were steadier now. She was no longer just following him, she was moving with him, matching his pace. As if they were already a team, they reached a wide street lined with abandoned storefronts, their windows covered in dust and grime. The air here was still, almost heavy, and the only sound was the distant drip of water from a broken gutter. "This way," she said, leading him toward a building with a faded sign he couldn't read. She slipped through a narrow gap in the boards, and he followed, his shoulders brushing the rough wood. Inside, the air smelled of dust and old wood. The space was empty except for a few broken chairs and a long-forgotten counter. The ceiling leaked in one corner, dripping water into a rusted bucket. She moved to the far wall and sat down, pulling the blanket from her bag and wrapping it around herself. Ethan stayed near the entrance, listening for any sound of pursuit, for the first time since they left his apartment. The night was quiet, but Ethan knew this wasn't the end. The chase had only started, and the people looking for her weren't going to give up. The abandoned building was quiet, the kind of quiet that felt heavy in the air. Outside, the city still slept under the thin light of the moon, but Ethan stayed awake. He sat near the boarded window, his eyes scanning the street through a narrow gap. The girl slept at first, curled in her blanket, but before long she stirred. Her glowing eyes opened, catching the faint light. She pushed herself up and looked around, checking the shadows the way she always did. "You didn't sleep," she said softly in her broken English. Ethan shook his head. "Had to make sure no one found us." She walked over and sat beside him. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The air smelled of dust and old wood, but there was also a faint warmth in the space, the kind that came from knowing the walls around you, even if broken, could still keep danger out. After a while, she spoke again. "You stay, even when danger." Ethan looked at her. "Of course I stayed." She seemed to think about that, her small hands twisting the edge of her blanket. "Oh, no one stayed before," she said. Something in Ethan's chest tightened. He didn't know all the details of her life before they met, but every small thing she revealed was like a piece of a puzzle he wished he didn't have to see. "Those people," he said carefully, "they're not going to take you again. Not while I'm here." She met his gaze for a long moment, then gave the smallest nod. "You? Not like them?" The night stretched on. Ethan knew they couldn't stay in this place forever. It was too open, too easy to find. But for now, it was shelter, and that was enough. When morning came, pale sunlight filtered through the cracks in the boards. The girl sat on the floor, eating the last of the bread Ethan had carried. She ate slowly, her glowing eyes fixed on him. "What?" he asked with a faint smile. She hesitated, then said a word in her own language. It was short, warm, and carried a weight he didn't understand until she pointed to herself and then to him. He repeated the word awkwardly. She smiled, not the cautious, guarded smile he had seen before, but something real. "What does it mean?" he asked. She touched her chest, then his, and said in English, "Family." The word hit him harder than he expected. For a long moment, he didn't know what to say. Family wasn't something Ethan had thought about in years. It was a word that belonged to another life, one he had buried a long time ago. But hearing it from her, here, in this forgotten building, felt different. "You think I'm your family now?" he asked quietly. She nodded. "Yes. You feed me, you keep me warm, you fight for me, family." Ethan felt a lump in his throat. He looked away, pretending to check the street, but inside he knew something had shifted. She wasn't just someone he had rescued. She was someone he was responsible for, someone who had chosen him. Before he could answer, sound outside broke the moment, the crunch of tires on wet pavement. Ethan froze, moving quickly to the gap in the boards. A dark van rolled slowly down the street, its windows tinted. It passed once, then again slower this time, as if scanning the buildings. "They found," she whispered, her voice tense. Ethan turned to her. "Then we move. Now." They gathered what little they had, the blanket, the bag, the flashlight. Ethan led her through the back of the building, where an old service door opened to a narrow alley. They moved fast, keeping to the shadows. The van didn't follow this time, but Ethan knew they couldn't take the risk of being seen again by midday. They were far from the east side of the city, walking along a quiet street lined with closed shops. The girl's hand stayed in his, her steps matching his pace. She didn't ask where they were going, and he didn't tell her, because the truth was, he didn't know yet. What he did know was simple. He would keep moving until she was safe, no matter how far that took them. As they walked, she spoke again in her own language, a long sentence this time. Ethan couldn't understand the words, but the way she looked at him made the meaning clear. It was trust, plain and strong. And for the first time in a long while, Ethan realized he trusted her too. Not because she was strong enough to survive on her own, but because she had chosen to believe in him. Even when she had every reason not to trust anyone, the road ahead was uncertain. The dangers far from over, but something had changed between them. She no longer followed him like a scared stranger. She walked beside him, family, in her own way. Ethan didn't need to say it out loud, but as he glanced down at her, he knew it in his heart. She wasn't alone anymore, and neither was he.